So first off, we'll have Sam Lindstrom. He's going to be presenting on Eleventy. And Sam is a full stack senior developer and the team lead at Salt Blockchain Inc. He's also the React Denver organizer, or one of the many React Denver organizers. So pretty cool, big meetup. So you should check that out if you haven't already been to it. It's a little bigger than us. And he's also my boss as of recently. Don't want to leave that out. So give him an extra round of applause for me. Yeah, so Sam, why don't you take it away?
Thanks so much, Gabe. Let me share my screen here if I can figure out how to do that real quick. You guys see that all right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
You're good to go.
Yeah, as Gabe mentioned, I'm involved in quite a few activities here in the community. React Denver being kind of one of my babies, so to speak. I run that meetup with a number of other co-organizers on our team, and it's just like you're seeing here with these guys who run Jamstack. It really does take a group of people, a team of people to run a meetup properly, especially during these times. So props to these guys for keeping this thing going, and it just offers a great opportunity to learn more about the Jamstack, which I will be quite honest with you, I'm definitely a beginner on. As Gabe mentioned, I work at Salt, and our day-to-day at Salt Lending is, primarily full stack. At least my duties are from all the way to like the deeper parts of our backend service side infrastructure to all the way to the front end, which is primarily React applications. But when Nick first approached me about giving a talk on Jamstack related topic, I definitely felt like I was sort of out of my realm there, given that I don't get to do a whole lot of Jamstack development. We do have a marketing website that's built in Gatsby at Salt, but it's mostly sustainable on its own. So I get to mess around with it a little bit here and there, but most of my learning nowadays comes with me just tinkering on the side or hearing about certain things in the community. So all that leads me to say essentially that, when this opportunity came up, I knew that one of the top 2 or 3 technologies that I was interested in diving into here was Eleventy. So I'm not sure if you guys have, or if anybody watching has heard of Eleventy. Perhaps it's old news by now, but for me, it was definitely kind of a revelation, I should say, and something that I, as Gabe mentioned, I want to find opportunities to use in my day-to-day beyond just side projects here and there. So with that intro aside, I just wanted to kind of get into a little bit more, like Eleventy basically. So it was created in 2018 by Zach Leatherman, and I have to give a shout out to Zach. I'm actually, when I first met Zach, was in Omaha, and I'm sure he doesn't remember me at all. But I met him at the Nebraska JS conference, which he ran at the time, and I believe has now been retired. But they still run a Nebraska JS meetup, and through that meetup, I think and through the conference itself was when I first heard about Eleventy. And I kind of dismissed it at the time, not really thinking, all right, it's just this, rolled utility essentially for static site generators, and didn't really give it a whole lot of thought until I started seeing increasing chatter about a year and a half ago online from some pretty, I would say, influential people in the performance space, browser performance, and just the web development space in general. Particularly Alex Russell, which I'll get to in a sec. I believe, I'm pretty sure he works on the Chrome team, works for Google, and does a lot of stuff with V8 performance and optimization. So it was through really him and a number of people online that I really got interested in Eleventy. And I'll move on here, but I wanted to really just kind of outline that history a little bit, and of course give some props to Nebraska JS, which I'm wearing a t-shirt here from one of their conferences. Rest in peace. Anyway, so for those of you who don't know, and I bring this up because this was a term that was so foreign to me for a long time, especially as Jamstack really kind of became more in the widely, the lexicon, I guess. Um, Essentially, right, a static site generator. I think the term is perhaps a little bit overcomplicated, but at its base level, it's just a utility that transforms templates into HTML, right? And so with that moving forward, like Eleventy, how it does what it does is basically it's simply a utility. It's not a framework, but just a utility that looks for valid templates in a folder that you specify and processes them to an output, right? So it's pretty basic in how it does what it does, but as you'll see here, it gets very flexible and adaptable. And leading into that, really where I think Zach, from what I've read and listened to, his whole impetus behind creating Eleventy, he had three things in mind. The first one being he wanted a piece of the Jamstack toolchain that was going to be flexible for him, and adaptable in many ways. Additionally, he really thought that the idea of betting on JavaScript with this was kind of a no-brainer to him. JavaScript has, a wide array of modules and utilities that one can lean on, and we have to fulfill that J part of the Jamstack acronym, right? Always bet on JavaScript, and furthermore, to kind of get away from the rat race, or that's what Zach refers to it as, the rat race of the framework wars. He specifically wanted to create a utility that didn't fit into that framework model that was super opinionated, right? So those three things are really what I've identified, and I think what Zach has outlined as being the three core values, I guess, of Eleventy. And so I'll elaborate on each of those just a little bit more here. But with Eleventy and the flexibility piece, I mentioned earlier that we're just taking templates from a specified spot and then processing them. And the templating languages that you're allowed to use in Eleventy are pretty comprehensive here, as you can see. This is the entire list, to my knowledge, of everything that you can use from a templating standpoint in Eleventy. And so there's like basically anything here to suit your needs or interests. Many of them I haven't used myself, but a couple I have, and it's pretty powerful. The other cool thing about these templating frameworks or languages, I guess if you want to call them, is that they're all interchangeable within Eleventy's structure. So the next part of flexibility that I think is worth outlining is this idea of directory structure within Eleventy. And I kind of alluded to it when I described what Eleventy does, but essentially you're just telling Eleventy where to find the files and how to process them. You are not like deeply entrenched in this framework or model that says you have to have a directory structure matching something really rigid, right? So that's kind of, to me, these are two of the big things as far as how I see the flexibility aspect of it. I think as we go forward here in this talk, you'll see a little bit more as to how Eleventy is flexible. But just to get to the next point here for betting on JavaScript, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but obviously this whole notion of having the NPM ecosystem and this large pool of resources, I guess you could say, in the JS space, which is, I can't remember the last stats I've seen, but I know it's by far and away the most widely used language on the web right now, right? So there's just so many resources there, and it's a pretty safe bet, I would say, that JavaScript is not going anywhere in the short term. And the other huge aspect of Eleventy that I think it takes a lot of pride in pointing out is the fact that it is not a framework. It's very lightweight, it's very modular, and it's very serious about being unopinionated and trying to keep itself decoupled from the rest of the utilities you have in your Jamstack toolchain. So this all kind of comes together, and given the fact that it's not so integrated with all these dependencies, means that we can use the tool to basically generate these really performant and small bundles. And I think hopefully you'll see that here further in the talk. So I just wanted to outline a few key concepts, and I should have mentioned this earlier in the talk, but I am by no means an Eleventy expert. I don't work in the Jamstack day in and day out, but this is just kind of some key concepts for people who are beginners. So if you're an Eleventy expert, this is probably all going to be review for you, but just wanted to go over, I think, what are a few key items that you may like to know if you wanted to spin up an Eleventy project tonight. So one of the first big concepts in Eleventy is this notion of collections. And basically, when you create a template, you have what are referred to as like front matter in the actual template itself. And I'll get to that in a little bit. But a collection is essentially how you aggregate your templates and group your content together. And as you can see here, it is not directory dependent. And the way we create a collection is by providing tags in the front matter of your templates. And Zach, in some of the videos and resources I was perusing, I kept getting confused by this term front matter. But really, it's this YAML syntax that is associated with the top of any template file that you have, where you're able to outline how these templates live together. And I'll show you some syntax here in a second. But it's all you really need to know is that a tag is just an identifier for an individual item. So in the case of like a blog, for example, you would have perhaps a blog post, and this is exactly what I'm trying to say here. This would be a very, very basic template, right? Where perhaps I would have some content below this title. I'm taking advantage of some handlebars kind of syntax here, but the front matter are the 3 dashed lines and then the YAML syntax below and then the 3 dashed lines. So in this particular case, I don't have content below that, but it will output the title I have in the front matter above. And because we have this particular post tagged with the post tag, that basically tells Eleventy that we need to group this particular post in the post collection. I realize that that's a lot of verbiage there, and it may sound like a lot to process, but it's very straightforward, and hopefully that will be the case. You'll see more of that as I show you more code here. But once we have a couple posts like this, so say we have 3, 4, 5 posts with ideally some content, they aren't just blank and have a title. But once we have a few of those, what we can do then in our actual like blog index is loop through that collection and display certain things. So this is a hypothetical index here where we're actually just outputting the post title, which we also specified in that front matter. And what we're then doing is linking that post title with the URL so that it makes it easily accessible from an index page. And it's this syntax, if you've never seen it before, is Liquid, is one of the really popular templating languages that I think is commonly used in Eleventy documentation. It seems to me to be one of the primarily used like templating languages. And from what I can gather, I don't know a ton about Liquid, but from what I can gather, I believe it just allows you to like add some more dynamic functionality to Markdown. So it plays nice, really nice with Markdown, and yeah, it's pretty basic. If you know Markdown, I think that you could get up and running with Liquid pretty quickly. So we've already talked about collections. We've talked about tags and individual items that then have to be grouped into those collections. But another important concept with Eleventy is this idea of a layout. And a layout is, I think, a pretty intuitive name. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's essentially just your wrapper for any of the content that you have grouped together and how you want to encapsulate it. And you can also specify a layout using a layout key that you'll find in the front matter of a post. And I'll show you that here in a second. But I also wanted to emphasize the fact that layouts are chainable. And I see it more as being like nesting layouts more than I see them as being chained. But in the documentation, they refer to it as chaining. So I don't know what's going on behind the scenes there to warrant that vocabulary. But to me, it's essentially this idea that you're just nesting layouts within each other in order to kind of build upon that in a modular fashion, right? So here's what a layout, if I was specifying an actual layout for an index, it's simply just a matter of adding that layout key to the front matter of this post here. And I should have added more content below the title, so maybe that would look a little bit like more clear as to what's going on here, but I'll show you some code later and I think it'll make a little bit more sense. So we've kind of touched some of the static pieces, and I guess I wanted to get into more of as to how you would handle data with Eleventy. And the data piece is one in which there are many strategies and a lot of flexibility, getting back to the whole core value, I think, of Eleventy itself. But I touched on this idea of front matter being a place where you really, where it seems to me that Eleventy relies on a lot for adding data. And from what I can tell, there are numerous different strategies that I'm sure if there's any experts watching this, or, they could for sure inform you more about that. But this front matter is all a part of what is referred to as the data cascade in Eleventy. And it's just this idea that basically, if we expect data from numerous different sources, they are prioritized and bundled in a certain way prior to runtime. So this is all being essentially aggregated and thrown together and then basically plugged into the application. And here's the priority for that data cascade. So I hope I'm not butchering this, but this is straight from the Eleventy docs, as much of this presentation is. So this is kind of the priority for how they determine where data gets displayed in the actual Eleventy application. So yeah, that's kind of the quick and dirty, I would say, on some of like the base concepts in Eleventy that I've been able to gather. And let me just show you now, we'll get into a really contrived example here with a blog. So I'm going to have to adjust my screen sharing real quick and show you some code. Hopefully not butcher this too badly. Let's see. So I'm just going to reshare. Hope you guys can see that. Seeing my code, I will bump this up so you can see. And so this is what I was referring to earlier, of this idea of like a post, right? And we could type in any content here, just to outline, like perhaps this is an actual blog post with real data in it or real content, right? And then when I actually go to my post one, I'm able to see that data. I forgot to comment out the random dog image, but that's in there as well. So you see our post here. We can go back and actually go to the blog index itself. And in our index.md, which is at the root level of the blogs directory, you'll see where I'm actually looping through these collections, or this collection of posts specifically. And if, as we saw in this post here, I tagged this blog post with post, which is how Eleventy knows that it belongs in this collection. And then at the top, as you've noticed, we have our liquid layout. So I'll open the layout here to the right. Maybe we can see side by side. And there's a lot to see here in the layout, but perhaps really the important stuff is just in the body. So we have a number of things that are going on here. Let me uncomment this code. And what that allows us to do, you'll see here in this header on line 9, this is where we are able to provide some functionality, like some nav functionality, I guess you could say. And we actually, we're duplicating our title here because I uncommented that code. But we have the nav functionality in the header. It's just as simple as going back to it, right? Using the layout is a way in which we can kind of compose layouts and have a nav bar or a sidebar, perhaps, if you wanted to get complicated with this, or not so complicated, but just more comprehensive than a super basic example that I have here. I'm going to comment out or delete this title code because we're already displaying the title in the post itself. But in the body, we're throwing out content, which Eleventy is smart enough to know, that this is like, it's almost like similar to React.children if you're a React developer or know any React, but it's basically spitting out the content and specs there. And then I have this code I was messing around with. I was following a tutorial that Jason Langsdorff did, where they're fetching basically these random images of dogs, and I forgot to delete it before this, but I think it's a good example of how you can fetch data and then plug it into specific like items that then go into collections. So I'll show you that as to how one might be able to feed data into here. So there are a couple different ways to do this, and I've only messed around with really this data.json idea, but it's super simple, I think. Essentially, all we're doing is doing this through a module.exports. We're just exporting an async function and then basically hitting this API, this dog.ceo API, and fetching a new dog image each time there's a post. And so we have the image, and then I'm returning it here in this object, which is then passed to the layout on the right side. And in the layout, I have this conditional using liquid syntax that's just saying, if there's a dog, then display it in an image tag, right? And otherwise display nothing. And it's super simple, but I think hopefully what it does is illustrate to you how far you can run with this. And there's a number of tools and packages and plugins that you can throw in and use with Eleventy, I think, to make this even simpler for you, especially this data fetching aspect of Eleventy. I've only scratched the surface on that. So that's kind of the quick and dirty. And if people have questions about any of this code or want to take a closer look at something, feel free to post in the chat, and I'm happy to go through anything. But essentially, that's kind of the idea of Eleventy. And yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to show you guys, but that's the basic rundown of how you get the tags and collections to do what you want and display the data in proper format. So I will share with you the rest of my slides. Just one moment. There it is. So we've gone over, some of, I think, like the base level stuff with Eleventy, and I hope that's informative for many of you. But of course, with any technology, we have trade-offs, and I do think that they're worth outlining here. So as far as like potential downsides, and I have this listed twice, as you'll see, but this isn't a framework, right? And I think depending on the experience level of a given developer, having a framework, something that's opinionated in place, can be really helpful to have, kind of those guardrails, so to speak. I'm a Rails developer in a former career, so for me, as I was first learning programming, I think having those that really opinionated framework kind of helped me get going when I first started. And I think that can be said for Eleventy. If you're first getting started in the Jamstack, I think that's something you have to consider, that there are not quite as many like paved cow paths, so to speak. There are so many ways to do a variety of things in Eleventy that perhaps one can feel overwhelmed, especially if you're a beginner. Additionally, Eleventy is only a couple years old, right? So this is still a pretty, I would say it's in its infancy really as a tool and as a Jamstack utility. So there are pros and cons to that as well. And as part of that, it means that there are not as many online resources as, say, something like Gatsby, or pick and choose your framework or a tool of choice that's been around for a number of years and has widespread adoption. There's just not as much out there. But I will say that in the last year, there seems to be many more Eleventy resources than I remember seeing, certainly in 2018 or early 2019. And now, of course, I want to outline some of the positives, of course, too. So I think for me, what attracts me to Eleventy, beyond just the performance of it and how small and lightweight it is this idea of it, that it's built for the long term, in the sense that it has really, I think, shot up the ranks in popularity here in the last year or so. And it really seems to me that it's gotten a lot more attention from people who are interested in really getting into the Jamstack. And I think, I believe Zach was actually, in the last 6 months or so, just started over at Netlify, and I've already seen a number of resources at Netlify relating to Eleventy. So I don't imagine that Eleventy is going anywhere anytime soon. And some of the negatives that I just outlined on the last slide about resources and tools, I think those are quickly going to be going away as this thing continues to grow. The other thing with Eleventy that I think is really cool is that if you wanted to try it out or integrate it into your existing Jamstack, that you can do so incrementally. Maybe I haven't emphasized it enough, but Eleventy is a utility, right? It's not a framework. It's just a tool that you can use anywhere in your tool chain. And so, depending on what kind of templates you have, what kind of templates you intend to use, Eleventy will probably play nice with them. And I think, as a positive of this being on the early stage of the adoption curve, is that if you're somebody who is really looking to leave a mark on a community, or contribute code, feedback, thought leadership, for lack of a better term, that there's an opportunity here with Eleventy, just because it seems to me that there are relatively so few people using this thing. And I know that Zach and his team of maintainers on the Eleventy GitHub page, they actively solicit like requests for fans or just users to vote on new feature requests. They just released, I believe, a new version of Eleventy here in the last, I want to say maybe it was early summer. And so they're working on new things all the time. And I really think that there is an opportunity here to leave a mark. So with that, I wanted to get into, so these are some of the resources I used. And I really recommend checking out the Eleventy docs. Their docs page is eccentric and kind of bizarre, but yeah, and there's a number of growing resources. I mentioned the Jason Langsdorf video. I found that to be pretty entertaining and very helpful. And I had about 5 other things I wanted to mention during the course of this talk that just totally zipped right over my head and I forgot to mention, but I will cut this thing short. I've already gone too long. So I hope that convinces you to give Eleventy a try. I think it's a super exciting utility. And I know for a fact that the next opportunity I get to write something using the Jamstack, Eleventy is without a doubt going to be a part of that. So with that, thank you very much for your time. And I'm happy to answer any questions if people have them.
Well, we'll give people your second. Don't know, are you going to keep your screen share up or not?
Oh, you want me to take it down?
Up to you. I just need to.
That's totally cool.
Adjust things accordingly. All right. So we did have one question. Let's see. Might have missed it, but is Liquid the default template? I can't speak today. Templating language. Can I pick something else?
I'm sorry. I think you cut out, Zach. What was the first part of the question?
Is Liquid just the default templating language, or can you pick something else?
Oh, you can absolutely pick something else. And I didn't really get into it much, but there is Eleventy opens itself up to configuration. So it does have some, I guess I would say, soft defaults in place, but there's a lot that you can do from a configuration standpoint. And the docs, I would say, are really good about outlining some of what you can do here. Maybe I'll pull it up. So, 11. And if you've already, maybe you've noticed, but it's totally arbitrary as to which name they use where. Sometimes it's the number 11 and TY, and sometimes it's spelled out.
All I know is the opossum. I know that guy.
Yeah. That's what I was, very eccentric looking docs page. But I don't know. So I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I don't think Liquid is necessarily the default. But to answer your question, even if you don't know Liquid, you can use whatever you want here. It's really pretty configurable. And this is what I wanted to show, was this configuration page down in the bottom left. There's so much you can do from the standpoint of identifying, which templating language you want to use. And you can even use different templating languages for individual items of a collection. So I could have my first blog post be written in Liquid. I could have my second blog post be written in Nunjux. I could have my third blog post be written in JavaScript. There's just a lot of options there. And this docs page doesn't want to load for the config, but if you're curious about what other configuration items to use, I would definitely recommend checking out the eleventy.dev docs.
Sweet.
Nice. I have a question.
Go for it.
I guess I'm curious, like, as to what the use case is for reaching to use Eleventy over another static site generator like Gatsby or whatever you've used before.
Yeah, that's something I was asking myself a lot, especially when I was first getting into Eleventy. Is like, how does this fit in, especially compared to Gatsby, because that's really the other big Jamstack tool that I've used. And really what I found is, like, this whole notion that Eleventy is lightweight and that it is a lot more modular and unopinionated than Gatsby, I think is a selling point. The other thing that I'm glad you asked that question, Gabe, because the other thing I wanted to show was this tweet from Jen Simmons. And this is kind of what piqued my interest again about a year or so ago. Let's see. Yeah, this one here. I don't know if you can see this, but Jen Simmons, she was tweeting about why do you like Eleventy, fans of Eleventy, why do you like it better than any other static site generators? And I liked this tweet over a year ago, and just I was looking for it again and dug it up. But I'm sure you guys know of Phil Hawksworth. Mm-hmm. If you don't, I think he works for Netlify perhaps, or did. And he's really kind of been a champion of Eleventy from what I can tell. And Alex Russell here was one who I mentioned previously. He talks a lot about performance in Chrome and just web standards in general. And, from all the data and from what these experts were espousing was that Eleventy is just by far and away some of the fastest websites they've seen are Eleventy built websites, which another quirk of Eleventy is it is almost impossible to tell if someone is using Eleventy to build their website. So I don't know what goes on behind the scenes to ensure that, but it's not like going to a Vue or a React site and easily telling, what framework they use to build it. Even Zach himself says that, he kind of ruined the whole vanity aspect of building this tool, because he can't tell if people are using them out in the wild unless they actually outline that to him. So I think the performance bit really is one of the big pieces, Gabe.
Yeah, that's cool. Performance and customizability, if that's a word. But yeah, very cool. Yeah. Nice. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, so we got, what's your favorite and or least favorite part of the DX?
My favorite part, that's a good question. And I think my answer to that would certainly change if I were to work on a large scale application versus just tinkering around with like a fake blog here as I did. But I I think my favorite part is the simplicity of the actual like using that front matter YAML syntax, how simple and readable that is to essentially aggregate posts and items into collections of content. I think it's super straightforward and really readable. And I think my least favorite part is some of it has to do with like the cow paths not being as paved. Because I'm one who will go down every rabbit hole sometimes to the detriment of my own productivity. So I'm over here messing around with like nunchucks and handlebars and all the different templating languages. And sometimes I prefer that somebody tell me what to do. But it's a double-edged sword. So I think if I were to build a large-scale application, I would have a much better answer for you on how the developer experience, what those pros and cons are. But overall, I love the simplicity of it. It's so simple and so fast, and I think it can be used in a wide variety of ways.
Yeah. Sounds like you almost need to go in with it with like a solid plan of like, all right, this is what I'm trying to build here. Let's not go down the rabbit hole of trying to use 4 different syntax languages or whatever.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. And maybe there are people who are more focused than I am that can just pick a route and really run with it to build something. I think I would like to redo my own portfolio website, and that's something that I would reach for Eleventy for. Although it's pretty basic stuff. At this point, you can go a long way with just HTML and a little bit of JavaScript and CSS and more. So I think it just depends on what you're trying to accomplish, of course.
For sure.
Yeah, that's right. It always depends. It depends.
Let's see. I'm not
So
seeing
true.
any more questions from chat. I don't know if that, Gabe, if you have any extra ones.
No. If there's no other questions, thank you, Sam. Snaps for Sam.
Thank
We
you.
need to play the applause track.
Yeah. I'll get that set up later.
Get that set up. I'm sure everyone's clapping.
We'll do it in
their own
post.
homes.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Claps.
I appreciate your
Thanks, Sam.
attention.